So when you hear people say Trump's theory is this, I can tell you without hearing you finish the sentence that it's wrong, because he doesn't have theories. I don't think he's capable of it. And I said in my book, and I've said since, I don't think he's fit to be president. I certainly don't think he represents American public opinion in many of the things he does internationally. He didn't win the 2024 election by saying we were going to invade Greenland, Canada, Panama, the Gaza Strip. He's probably not finished yet. These are things that no American other than Donald Trump has thought of. So just to reinforce what was said a moment ago, I think it's critical in Europe that you remember that even though we've got 46 long months to go, the world will actually continue after Trump leaves office. And we've got to keep in mind what that world is going to look like to minimize the amount of damage that's done in the near term in order to facilitate repairing that damage over the longer term.
Let's talk, because I think most of us thought that we were prepared for Trump 2.0, but obviously we weren't. And Siv Jensen just said that, well, it was bumpy in his first term as well, but I think maybe the biggest difference here is that in his first term, there were grown-ups in the room. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, Charles Krauthammer, many of you may have read some of his columns on the United States, a very, very wise American advisor of American affairs, once told me that he was a psychiatrist before he became a pundit. He said, you know, I came to the conclusion Trump was actually an 11-year-old. but I realized I'd made a big mistake. I was 10 years off. He's a 1-year-old who again sees everything through the prism of a 1-year-old, which is this good for me or not?
But he seems to have this anger towards Europe. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is he really so angry with Europe or the European Union, or what is all this aggression about?
Well, I think he's a man full of grievances. I mean, to listen to him tell it, nobody in contemporary history has been more mistreated than Donald Trump. Everybody picks on him, everybody gets away with it, and he's fighting back, not for himself, of course, but for the American people. And unfortunately, that has proven to be a successful political line. It's not Europeans, I think, that he dislikes as such. I think he does dislike the EU. And there are a lot of reasons for that, many of which I share, many of which others in the United States share, but none of which justify what we've been going through for the past couple of months. Trump sees international relations as a series of personal relations. So he thinks if he has good personal relations with the head of a foreign government, let's say Vladimir Putin, just as an example, that then the United States itself has good relations with Russia. And the converse is true. If he has bad personal relations with a foreign leader like Volodymyr Zelensky, then the U.S. has bad relations with that country. Now that's obviously a gross distortion, but that's not how Trump sees it. So if you look at his relations with past European leaders, or leaders around the world, he had good relations with Jens Stoltenberg. He had probably the best relation with any foreign leader with Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan. He had great relations with Boris Johnson of Great Britain, but he had bad relations with Angela Merkel, Theresa May. I could go to a much longer list that he didn't have good relations with, and I think that's part of the problem. But it has significant ramifications today because there are so few leaders in Europe that have ever dealt with Trump before. I noticed that the President of Finland recently came and had played golf with Trump. This is a real plus. Prime Minister Starmer of the United Kingdom made a great impression on Trump in his first visit a couple months ago when he presented a letter from King Charles inviting Trump to a state visit to the United Kingdom. And I was with Trump on his first state visit when Queen Elizabeth invited him, and I would say in the sort of the 36 hours of all the ceremony around the state visit, culminating in the white-tie dinner in Buckingham Palace, which I have to say was quite an event for a mere commoner, that I've never seen Trump so happy. He was with the Queen of England, for God's sakes. And remember, his mother was Scottish. So Starmer's played the state visit card, but you have a king here. Your prime minister should be thinking about when the appropriate time is to invite him to Norway for a state visit. That's how he sees the world.
Well, his good relationship with Mr. Stoltenberg obviously didn't help us yesterday when Liberation Day. I'm going to talk a little bit about that now, because what we see today are some serious setbacks for global economy, dramatic market reactions. Does any of this affect Trump at all?
Well, since he looks to polish his own reputation, I think many people believed that on the tariff front, as on other fronts, he wouldn't carry through with a lot of what he had said during the campaign or on other occasions. People remembered from the first term that he looked very carefully at the stock market and adjusted different economic positions, in particular when the market reacted negatively. Well, for about 4 to 6 weeks now, the market's reacted negatively every time the subject of tariffs has come up, whether it's with Canada, Mexico, China, Liberation Day yesterday, and so far he hasn't budged. People have also said, look, all this is just bargaining. This is the way Trump is. He wants something, so he says, well, we may invade Greenland, when all he wants is to modify the 1951 Danish-U.S. Defensive Greenland Treaty, which he doesn't know it exists, but he once asked, I think he asked John Kelly, before we went to Helsinki for the summit with Putin in 2018, right after the NATO meeting of the breakfast you just heard about it, where we almost withdrew from NATO. And he said to Kelly, is Finland still a part of Russia? Just to emphasize, I don't want to get off subject on the tariffs, but just to give you a little bit better sense of Trump and his knowledge of history and international affairs, on that same trip we were in England at the invitation of Theresa May, and she had Trump and out to Chequers, the British Prime Minister's country residence, which is quite a place. And we were sitting in the Great Hall, and one of the advisors on the British side was talking about the Russian effort to kill the Skripals, 2 exiles from Russia, to kill them with Novichok, a chemical weapon, about 2 months before we were in England. And this fellow said, we took this very seriously. This was one nuclear power attacking another nuclear power with chemical weapons. And Trump looked at Theresa May and said, do you have nuclear weapons? So when you talk about what Trump is after here, I think he has a number of competing thoughts in his head, but they don't form any coherent picture. He'd like to see more manufacturing in the United States. He'd like to see more tax revenues without having to ask for a tax increase. He likes to beat up some countries that he thinks are mean and nasty to the United States. And it gives him a feeling of authority when he can just unleash the tariff weapon like this. But if you ask, well, what's the end state? He can't tell you, because if his desire to increase American manufacturing is a goal, he's not going to reduce the tariffs. There's nothing to negotiate about. If you reduce the tariffs, you decrease the incentive for people to invest more in manufacturing in the United States. You also decrease the revenue that he expects to get from it and decrease your leverage. I'm very worried he understands the whole tariff issue so little that we're going to get into a trade war and he's not going to know how to get out of it. As an example of that, he doesn't understand how tariffs work. And I've heard it explained to him by Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin and economists of great reputation in the first term, something any American business person who imports anything knows very well. The foreign government, the foreign manufacturer, doesn't pay the tariff. The American importer pays the tariff, and then does everything that he can to pass that on to the American consumer. So it's the American consumer that will bear the brunt of the higher prices of the tariffs. I mean, if I thought foreigners paid tariffs, it'd probably sound like a good idea to me too. But they don't. We pay the tariffs. This is why it's a self-inflicted wound, ultimately, economically. And why, if there is a trade war, we're all going to be worse off, because other countries will impose tariffs on importing United States goods to raise the prices for your consumers. This is economic illiteracy.
The Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs just stated in a Norwegian newspaper that the tariffs may not be in line with the NATO agreement's Article 2. Is that a wise statement when we are all concerned about whether or not Trump will withdraw from NATO?
Well, it's a correct statement. It may not be entirely wise in the circumstances. You know, this is sort of heresy to people in the European Union, or some people in the European Union now, but Article 2 does refer to trying to enhance the economic well-being of NATO members, and there's a good reason for that. Remember, we're just coming off, really when NATO was formed, in the early days of the Marshall Program, an effort to rebuild European economies after the devastation of World War II, to reduce the risk of Soviet takeover of the whole continent. So when the founders of NATO put it together, they very much had in mind economic cooperation. Now, some European leaders had other ideas later that led to the European Union, but this is a problem that remains unresolved. Pointing out these problems with what Trump is doing, however, and complaining about them, can fly in the face of the point I made a moment ago, which is to think about this long term. When you have the incoming Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, say that Germany wants independence from the United States, and by the way, I didn't know they weren't independent from the United States, but leaving that aside, or you have Kaja Kallas, the EU Foreign Affairs Director, say it's time for a new leader for the free world. These are the kinds of statements that allow Trump to say, well, okay, if the Europeans don't want us, then we're not going to impose ourselves on them. We'll get out of NATO and they can do what they want. I just think the whole situation on large issues like the tariffs, on specific issues like Greenland, would benefit enormously if people stopped talking about them and we negotiated them behind closed doors. I think we'd be a lot better off. Now, I know Trump never stops talking. As an astute person once said to me, there's no filter between Trump's brain and his mouth. That the temptation for other political leaders is to respond, and my advice is grit your teeth and say something like the Danish foreign minister said a couple of days ago after J.D. Vance went to Greenland and attacked Denmark for being a bad ally. He said, the foreign minister of Denmark said, that's not the way you talk about another ally. And that's right. So just because they're doing it doesn't mean everybody else should do it. I realize this is difficult, but as I say, grit your teeth. It's only 46 months to go.
Well, you referred to President Putin before. It might seem that Trump is trying to sort of normalize the relationship with Putin. Is that because he wants to detach Russia from China?
No, there's this argument among some of Trump's supporters in the U.S. that it's a very tricky maneuver here, that we're going to concede Ukraine basically to Russia if Russia will agree to detach from China. Now, A, that's not a trade I would make, and B, it's not a trade that's going to work, because at this point Russia can't detach itself from China. This is unfortunate. As an abstract principle, we should try to split Russia from China. We've been trying to split the two of them for a long time, beginning with Nixon and Kissinger playing the China card against what was then the Soviet Union. But the idea that you can compromise on Ukraine in an effort to induce Moscow to move away from Beijing is simply not going to work. The trouble is, it's not Trump negotiating with Putin, it's Putin manipulating Trump. As I say, Trump thinks that he and Putin are friends. He thinks he and Xi Jinping are friends. After Trump first met Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, in Singapore, Trump said publicly, "We fell in love." That's not how the three of them think of him. And Putin in particular, as a former KGB agent, is manipulating Trump, and Trump doesn't understand it. Trump said during the 2024 campaign that the war in Ukraine would never have occurred if he had been president, which is a statement that's neither provable nor disprovable. But about 2 weeks ago, Putin said in response to a reporter's question in Moscow, "Well, I think President Trump's right. There wouldn't have been a war if he had been president." Well, of course, Trump took that to be recognition of what an astute observer of him Putin was. And that's how the manipulation began. Then Putin released an American hostage, a kidnapped victim really, named Mark Foley. And then Belarus's Lukashenko released another American. And this is what's been going on. And so far, from the Kremlin's point of view, very successfully. Trump's not negotiating with anybody except himself at this point.
And the one day that he was going to take to finish the war in Ukraine, Putin is not exactly collaborating, is it?
Right. I mean, Putin right now has received an enormous number of concessions from the United States before the negotiations even began, that we would not insist on a restoration of full sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, no NATO membership, no NATO security guarantees, no U.S. security guarantees. So Putin has to be careful that he doesn't jeopardize any of those concessions, but he's also clearly just trying to string this out as far as he can. And now Trump is giving him assistance in doing that because he's been concentrating on the tariffs, and he'll concentrate on those for a few more days while Ukraine just continues to go along, and maybe at this point Russian troops continue to make advances.
Okay. We have many topics to cover in a very brief time, but I just touch a little bit on the bilateral relationship between the United States and Norway. I mean, the core has always been intelligence collaboration, and it's been for decades. Can we trust that to remain?
Well, I'm worried that the structure of NATO itself is still in jeopardy, and intelligence relationships are in jeopardy for a variety of reasons, not only because of Trump and his own proclivities, but figures like Tulsi Gabbard, who's the director of national intelligence and who is utterly unqualified for that job, by the impression that's given when the entire National Security Council process is reduced to a signal chat group. This is not good news. This is I got to say, in my time at the National Security Council, when we had our chat groups in the Situation Room, and nobody used emojis. So there's a lot to worry about here.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go to internal questions from within the United States for a while. Is Trump seriously attempting to run for a new period?
Well, I think he's trying to give the impression that he can, but the 22nd Amendment's very clear. He cannot run for a third term. I think he'd like to get people to forget that not only is he a new president, but he's also a lame duck president, which is something we've never experienced before. And as time goes on, particularly if these tariffs and the coming trade war cause economic pain, his approval ratings will drop, and Republican prospects in the 26 midterms and the 28 presidential election will go down. So some people would like to think that Trump can do that, but he's not an existential threat to the Constitution. He's got to do a lot of damage, he already has, but it's not existential.
Okay. So if not, do you think that J.D. Vance then will be the next presidential candidate for the Republicans?
Well, I'd say at this point J.D. is just about the strongest proponent of the argument that the 22nd Amendment does preclude a third term. Because if he can't win that argument, he's not going to get the Republican nomination. But he's no shoo-in for the Republican nomination. If the economy turns down, just like Kamala Harris couldn't divorce herself from the Biden administration. He will be unable to divorce himself from Trump. And in American history, only 2 vice presidents have ever gone directly from being vice president to president by election. One was George H.W. Bush, and the other was Martin Van Buren in the early 19th century. So it's a statistical improbability.
Okay. But why are the Republicans so passive towards the president? Or are they just actually applauding what the president is doing?
I think the vast bulk of Republicans out in the country are still Reagan-Bush conservatives when it comes to foreign policy. I think in Washington, in the Senate and the House in particular, because they're all up for re-election next year, they're very worried. Their districts have been divided into more safe Republican and safe Democratic districts. They worry more about their primary than the general election. So the good news and the bad news is that Republicans, especially in the House, are intimidated by Trump. They don't agree with him, they're intimidated. It would be worse if they actually agreed with him. Being intimidated is bad enough, but I do think it's beginning to crack. And there was an interesting vote in the Senate yesterday. It won't be adopted by the House, but by a vote of 51 to 48, one senator didn't vote. They disapproved Trump's use of authority under a particular congressional statute to impose the Canada-Mexico tariffs. So that's a major defeat in the Senate. It only took 4 Republicans, but once it starts, I think it's easier to do the next time. So I think Republicans, you'll see more opposition. I wish it were coming quicker, but I do think it's coming.
Okay, so you see a future then for the Republican Party as we know it, or will it sort of remain like a Trumpist?
No, I don't think it will be Trumpist. I think when he leaves the political scene, it will snap back into being more of a Reagan, Bush-style party. And I think one reason for that is reality will intrude. And the threats that are out there that Trump doesn't see. Trump has trouble distinguishing his friends from his adversaries. And I think it's going to be clearer and clearer what's going to happen. Let me just say one word about the Democratic Party. They're like an EKG graph that's gone flat. There's just no sign of them in Washington. And I have to say, I've never seen anything like it before. So if they came to life again, then it'd be more interesting.
There is one person trying to outshine Trump all the time, and that's Elon Musk. How long will this romance last?
Well, as I mentioned to you yesterday, I thought it's not going to last very long, and now the papers in the U.S. this morning are saying, Trump's saying he's leaving within a couple of months. So I just wanted to get it on the record that I said it yesterday, not today. But it is a fact that while the Oval Office is actually a pretty good-sized office, it's not big enough for those 2 egos in there at the same time. And I think what Musk has done and it has a lot of support in the country. People think the government's big and flabby and wastes a lot of money, and that he may not have followed Marcus of Queensberry rules, but he's cutting expenditures, and they like that. They don't like some other aspects of it. But Musk has also been what observers in Washington call a heat shield for Trump, a heat shield against political criticism. Now, I think he's less of a shield and more of a target. And so, as with many other people who've worked for Trump, you come to a point where he just used you, and it's time to move on. I don't know who he is. Remember what he did with, Elon Musk is the wealthiest man in the world this time, runs big companies. In the first term, Trump had Rex Tillerson as his first Secretary of State, the CEO of Exxon, pretty big company then, and he fired him. So this is Donald Trump. It's totally transactional.
Since we are here at Svalbard, we have to touch upon the Arctic discussions as well. We see that Arctic issues is escalating, and we have heard Trump claiming Greenland. Will he claim Svalbard?
I don't think he knows about Svalbard. I would keep it that way. But economic issues are more important, and it is accurate, as was said earlier, that the Russians have been thinking about it a lot longer than I think people in Washington have thought about it during the Cold War, because we were worried about Soviet ICBMs coming across the North Pole. It's much more complicated now in the maritime domains as the ice melts, and in regard to other assets, minerals and others, either in the sea or on land. So I think everybody in NATO has got to think more about it, and the key countries are the NATO countries that are actually in the Arctic: Norway, Denmark, Canada, and the United States. The others have a big interest. I'm delighted that Sweden and Finland have joined NATO after 75 years of an erroneous policy of neutrality. But I'm glad they're with us now. I hope NATO's still around for a couple of years so they get the benefit of it. But there's no doubt NATO's got to think much more strategically about what happens up here. Let me just say a quick word. Donald Trump did not actually discover Greenland for America. I just want to say Greenland is part of the North American landmass. The capital, Nuuk, is closer to Washington than it is to Copenhagen. The shortest distance between 2 points in Greenland and the United States is shorter than the 2 closest points between Greenland and Denmark. It's a little closer to Canada, as you may have observed from the map. But the United States has had an interest in Greenland for a long time. William Seward, who bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, tried to negotiate a treaty with Denmark in 1868 to buy Greenland. The United States offered to buy Greenland in 1917. They refused, but they did sell us the Danish Virgin Islands to protect the Atlantic approaches to the Panama Canal. We had Marines and Coast Guard on Greenland after the Danish government fell in World War II, before Pearl Harbor, and after Pearl Harbor, we were all over Greenland to protect the North Atlantic convoys. In 1947, Harry Truman offered $100 million to buy Greenland. They still wouldn't sell it. So look, this is when Trump threatens force or doesn't rule it out, it's unacceptable. It's outrageous. But it's a good example of an issue that could be negotiated behind closed doors, because every NATO member has an interest in keeping Russia and China out of Greenland. And if we could just stop talking about it publicly, I think if Trump hadn't blown up at the Danish Prime Minister, who was still Prime Minister today, in 2019, when she said, it's outrageous to say we're going to sell Greenland, he called her nasty. He's a nasty woman, he said. What can I tell you? If he hadn't said that, if we just could have met with him in private, this whole thing might be over by now.
Okay. You said earlier on that we just have to sit through the next 46 months. Will the American democracy survive this?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. We've faced a lot worse than Donald Trump. We did fight a civil war where 2% of the population died in combat. That's a pretty significant number. Trump does many things that do damage to the country, but in looking at the life of republics through history, people sometimes compare us unfairly or fairly to Rome. I don't know. You can do what you want, I suppose. But Donald Trump is no Catalan. He's no Sully. He's no Pompey. And for God's sakes, he's no Julius Caesar.
I think that's a good place to close this up. I think there was some positive optimism there from you.
Well, Winston Churchill had a famous line that many of you may know. He used to say, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing, usually after they've tried everything else. Which is what we're doing now. So thank you very much.